Hey there, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining my channel, The Magical Solution. This is how we grow. I am super, super excited tonight because I have the most beautiful, amazing guest, and I have all of her books. And I'm just so excited to talk with her today about a subject that I know that you all are going to be super interested in. Okay, her name is the beautiful Erika Buenaflor. Now, Miss Erika has a master's degree in religious studies with a focus on Mesoamerican shamanism from the University of California at Riverside. A practicing curandera for more than 20 years, descended from a long line of grandmother curanderas, she has studied with curanderas in Mexico, Peru, and Los Angeles, and gives presentations on curanderismo in many settings, including UCLA. The author of Cleansing Rites of Curanderismo, Curanderismo Soul Retrieval, Sacred Energies of the Sun and Moon, and now, of course, Animal Medicine. She lives in, hopefully I don't butcher this, Turunga, California. I'll get the correct the correct pronunciation of that in a moment. So without further ado, let's bring her over.
Hi,
Hey! How are you?
Fabulous. And yourself?
Fabulous. Now, how badly did I butcher that area? How do you pronounce it? There it is. So we have a bunch of people on, and I want to say thank you all for showing up. Please share and comment so that more people can see. And let's get into it. Let's talk about everything, shall we?
Yes.
So,
yes.
You are a curandera. What is that? Let's talk about that. What is curanderismo?
So at its basic, just most fundamental aspect, Curanderismo is a Latin American shamanic healing practice. Its roots are from the indigenous peoples of the Americas. And it's a very eclectic practice too, because it incorporates a lot of other traditions and practices. And that's the fundamental aspect. It's a healing shamanic practice.
So healing shamanic practice, is that more rooted in sort of animism and more earth-based kinds of traditions, or is it sort of magical and mystical and fantastical, if that's the right word?
Well, so something to keep in heart and mind is that it's rooted in indigenous tradition. So there were hundreds, and I mean hundreds of specialties. It wasn't like, you had like different kinds of curanderos, shamans that did various different kinds, like there were different kinds of shapeshifters, like specific ones that did specific things. There were different kinds of readers that read certain things that would actually do things like there were just so many different specialties within subspecialties. So one of the things is that when the missionaries came over, is basically if they liked you, you were curanderos, curandera, curandero, they use that. But if they didn't like you, you were a brujo or bruja.
Ah, and we all know how that went. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you can like think of, because you start looking at the records and you're like, okay, when they didn't like you, you're like, oh, it's brujo, like they're working with the devil and da 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 da. But if they did healing work and you liked them and you were on their side, then they heal people. They're curandero, they're curandera,
Yeah, but I mean, the shamanic practices were balanced. You had a little bit of everything in there, so we can't say they're 100% completely right. And it's interesting that you say that they all had kind of like their specialty. There really wasn't a shaman that kind of did it all. There was like specialties. That's awesome.
There were some shamans that did a lot of different things, but there were like some that had specialty. It was just like so many. Like when I looked at like for the Maya, Magickal, just so many different kinds. And they went to him. Then there was like certain people that worked with certain kinds of people too.
Now you're speaking from the perspective of Mesoamerica and South America, and I know when you move up towards the islands and up towards like South America, a lot of these definitions change and a lot of like the practices change, but there's still a lot of root practices across all of them, and some of them are the practices of medicine and working with the plants. Some of them are the practices of working with the animals. And in particular, your book, Animal Medicine, a Curanderismo guide to shapeshifting, journeying, and connecting with animal allies. You touch on that in this book, and I definitely want to get into that tonight. So, one of the things that I was really curious about is the relationship between the fauna and the animals. Can you touch on that a little bit?
So one of the things that's very interesting, well, there's just so many things, but like one thing that really stood out with me in my research is that they had more medicinal recipes that were made from animals that came from animals than they did from plants.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's something to keep in heart mind, that they animals were just so fundamental to them in so many different ways, and they played such a huge role, like in omens and guides and shapeshifting, just so you name it. So the fauna had its own, they had like its own elementals. They had their own like understanding of that too. So its own kingdom. So there was like it was like a kingdom, like a different kind of kingdoms, understandings, and connections with that. They were part of nature, but they definitely had their own kingdom and their own different recipes and magic and associations with them.
Would you consider it a hierarchy, or is it just a different world?
It's a different world, and within that world there were different hierarchies.
Interesting.
Like animals, there were different animals that were understood, like, oh, this is the animal that, this is the stork. The stork was the one that was like the ruler of the lake, and they had like certain the jaguar, only certain peoples that were elite could be jaguar, like could shapeshift into jaguar. So there were definitely hierarchies, and there were different hierarchies with plants and understandings. But the plants is a very, like, that's something that's like
it might be a whole book in and of itself.
No, that was definitely. Then they had all these hot cold associations, and
that is too cool. I know a lot of people attribute to Mesoamerica the skulls, and there's a lot of things with like crystals and skulls and things like that. I personally don't know much about that. Did you ever come across about anything in your studies?
I'm writing about it right now, because I'm writing
Shut up!
on ancestor veneration. So talking about like bones and like how to like conjure and like connect with ancestors through bones.
Oh, did you guys hear that? Oh, wait for that, you guys. Wait for that. Speaking of your books, let's kind of do a quick little shameless plug here, and let's just kind of show your books, you guys. These are the ones. Make sure that you go onto Amazon, you go onto her website, you buy all of these books, and of course these upcoming ones that you're working on. That's so excited. And I believe the cleansing rites of Curanderismo is available in Spanish as well.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, sorry. I got so like distracted on that when you said that. I was like, yes, your books. Let's talk about that.
No, yesterday I was reading about it, and I was like, I am so fascinated with this. I'm like, I am so weird.
Not at all. Right there. So, I wanted to, I've been lately getting into like TikTok and all these like really new social media sites, Discord. Well, maybe not new, just new to my old millennial butt. But I'm noticing a lot of young people are speaking about cultural appropriation, and they're very much hung up on these terms about spirit animal guide versus animal spirit guide, that one of them belongs to a shamanic practice and we shouldn't be using it, and the other term is open and it's okay to use. And I'm very confused, because when it comes to stuff like that, I don't understand it. So I'm wondering if you have an opinion on that, if you want to touch on that, want to talk about that.
Well, I think it's something that goes back to, like those understandings of appropriation. There has to be a distinction between appropriation and misappropriation. And I always recommend to people, like, if anything, like, degrees don't mean anything. Like, it doesn't mean anything. They don't mean anything. But like the one good thing that I did appreciate was that the critical race theory classes. To get my critical like thinking on, like, oh no, like, and they're important to understand, because And I'm going to give you an example. This is something that I'm looking at in my current, well, it's been throughout the books, but one of the things, for example, like the Mexica, the Aztec, when they migrated from, some say like it was in the Southwest, but it was definitely up north, and it was something that they took some time, like up north, possibly somewhere in the Southwest, and they migrated into central Mexico, right? They migrated and they took over one of the cities, Tula, which was the capital of the Toltec. And Toltec was like a huge like city state before, like it was during the post-classic, but it was way before, like hundreds of years before them. And then they're like, oh, they like felt this strong affinity with the land and the capital. They fell in love with it. And they're like, these are our ancestors, right? And then they did something similar too with Teotihuacan. They actually took like one of the cities, like they took over and they had this connection. And like Teotihuacan was like ginormous state. Like it was huge and they were very powerful, right? So it was convenient that they're like, okay, no, these are our ancestors. Because it's funny, because sometimes I hear people say like Toltec traditions. I'm like, okay, yeah, you mean Toltec traditions through the Mexica. So if you look at like, the appropriation, because they appropriated like straight out. Straight out. I mean, they like took Toltec, Teotihuacan, like at the same time, that goes on through so many times, like so many cycles of appropriation. To think that something like brand new and hasn't been like come out from something else is a little naive.
Yes.
It's a little naive, but at the same time, there is misappropriation. Okay. Appropriation is a common practice. Misappropriation is when someone starts like saying that they're practicing something, they're doing something, but they don't acknowledge where these things come from. They don't say like, oh, well, this is actually, from the Maya. They're just like, oh, I'm just doing this. They have no idea. They don't give props.
Right.
And that's been happening for hundreds of years for people of colors, for our traditions, for our ceremonies, for our rites. A lot of folks have been coming in and they just like misappropriate it, like claim it, but they don't say where it comes from, and they don't even do the due diligence to look at the research. So, like in like researching like anything, like in Curanderismo, when people ask me, is this a closed practice? And I said, yes, it's not. And I said, no, it's not a closed practice, but it is if you don't pay respect.
Facts.
Yeah. Like you have to do some research, like be willing to do your research and give props where this comes from. Because we are multidimensional beings. To say that, like I have connections sometimes, I feel, to like certain things that I've gone to Cambodia, like I've seen dreams in Cambodia, and I've never been to Angkor the temple, but I have like connections there, and I'm very connected to Mesoamerican roots. But we haven't just lived in one life. So we are going to have connections to different things, to different peoples. But at the same time, if I'm going to like, connect to something that is straight out Buddhist, I'm going to recognize it as that.
Exactly.
And I'm going to do my research for that, because I'm not going to misappropriate something.
And I think those connections too are so, I think we should stop looking down our nose at it. I think it's a beautiful opportunity for us as a world community.
Yeah.
Not just this little part over here and this little part over here, but as a world community to really, connect with each other and to share with each other and things like that. I think it's a wonderful thing. So I'm glad you kind of touched base on that. Is there an actual difference though with the language of animal spirit guide versus animal guide? You see how silly I sound?
Again, that's the definition. Yeah. If someone is going to, I'm not going to allow anyone, that's something that we need to make sure, especially people of color, just Black, Indigenous people of color, like all of us, we need to make sure that we own the right to define certain terms. That's where the power of like attorneys are at. They know that power because they define things. When we start giving our power away and start agreeing to like, oh, this is how, this is, if we say like, this is how I'm going to define it, and these are the reasons why I'm going to define it. Like for this book, for example, for animal medicine, I identified a lot of these shapeshifters as curanderas rather than shamans. And the reason for that is because in a lot of the academic work, that the academic circles, they started doing this dichotomy of like, oh, well, they were shapeshifters, they were like using witchcraft, it was bad witchcraft, it was like this was like those shapeshifters, they were witches. They started doing what the Spanish did, a lot of them, not all of them, not all the scholars do that, but quite a few of them, you know. And I won't like go into like take names or, but you know, quite a few of them, right? So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to use the definition of curanderics, because curanderics, in a lot of contemporary understandings, we're known to be able to do shamanic work, to do healing work, to do brujeria, to do witchcraft. So we're versed in all those things. And that's how I'm going to define it in this context.
Love it. Love it.
You know?
I love it.
So is there I use animal guides because there's just so many different things. There's animal totems, there's this, there's that. There's so many different things. I said, you know what? These are my guides, and they happen to be animals. Animal guides. Easy
There
peasy.
it is. Easy. Love it. So speaking of shapeshifters, because that's a huge, I mean, that's pretty much the chunk of this book, is really getting into that. And then the second half of the book, she basically gives you like an entire dictionary, you guys, of all the different animals, all of their meanings, their purposes, the worlds that you can find them in, their symbols. I mean, just everything you can think of regarding those particular animals. So the first half is all the info you need, and the second half is that dictionary, and it's amazing. So speaking of that, and may I just say, your writing style too, you know, you write like an anthropologist who is trying to teach elementary school, because it's like such complicated theory and such complicated ideas that you really simplify, and you make it so digestible, and you make it so easy for the reader. And I appreciate that a lot, because you give a lot of historical information, you show pictures, you know, there's no lie. There's no lie, and I love it. So, you know, to get back to my question with regards to shape-shifting, you speak a lot about shape-shifting, and you speak it in terms of animism. What is animism? Can you explain that to the viewers?
So there's a lot of different understandings, but like one of the ways that I'll define it is it's basically that certain items, buildings, a lot of things that Western folks would call inanimate, that they have a soul energy, right? And that they are animated. They can be animated with soul energy. So the shape-shifting, you know, a lot of the shape-shifting is that something that, and this is something that one of the greatest, in my opinion, Lopez Austin, like one of the grandfather of Mesoamerican scholar, like he was bomb. Like he was a scholar, and he talked about like some cool stuff, you know. He talked about the shapeshifters, the animating energies of like how they used animating energies, soul animating energies, to engage in shape-shifting practices.
That's interesting, because, you know, when you think of animism, there are two schools of thoughts. You have those who think that rocks and buildings and your clothing has a spirit, and that everything is enlivened with spirit. And then you have that second school of thought that says, no, there are objects, there are inanimate that you have to then breathe life into and give them the spirit. So are you of the later school of thought? Is that where Curanderismo is?
It's both. It's both, because it's something, I mean, and it's like my mentors, that's what they taught me. You know, because it was like some of the things that they would tell me, like, and it was very subtle when they would tell me things like, oh, the house isn't going to like that.
Yeah.
But they would tell me, like, it's like certain things already have their identity. It's like giving them props, but at the same time, when you move into a house, a certain space, you start sharing and blending of soul animating energies. That's not to say that that space didn't already have, didn't have its own animating energy, you know, but it's like you have a new owner, you have a new occupants. You know, it's like when it's like, I don't know, it's something silly, but like when women, like they move together, they start sharing like the same cycles.
Yes.
It's energy.
It happens at work all the time, and it drives us all crazy.
You start you start sharing. I mean, that's one example, right? But you
Mhm.
start sharing, you start connecting with one another and you start blending of soul energies. That's the understanding of sacred items, sacred buildings. And what is sacred is when you start honoring and recognizing it as such.
Interesting. And so, what is the shapeshifter's role in that? Like, with this animation, are they animating are are they animating an object to then connect with that object? Because we're talking about animals here, and I would think that animals have spirits already. So, what's that animation relationship then? What does that actually look like?
So, I think I feel that the Maya, the Maya classic vases, they have like the most diverse like display of different kinds of shape shifting. And I talk about this too in my book about the different kinds of shape shifting, right? One of them that was that a lot of people focus on are just physical shape shifting, right? Like like someone you change form and you become an animal. And a lot of the 17th century like ethno-historians that I write about, they actually like wrote about like the missionaries were like they saw like one lady who looked like a bat, but I mean, it was a bat, but it looked like a lady. It didn't look like a normal bat. And they were like trying to like hit it, like hit the bat, like hit the bat. And then the next day, the lady comes and like, why were you accosting me? Why were you trying to kill me yesterday? And they're like, and then she's like, yeah, I came in and I came in as a bat. Because it was an older lady. And she like for her, that was something that wasn't uncommon. And these are
Right.
missionaries that didn't, they're just like, what? So
So we're talking about actual physical
that's
shape-shifting. We're
one
not
example.
talking about in the astral realm. We're not talking about shape-shifting your mind into the spirit alligator. No, we're talking like full on your skin gets scales.
In
For
that
real,
example,
for
yes.
real?
In that example, yes. And I gave a lot of I talk a lot about that, like where they documented this. Because they were like they were just in a different world, a lot of them. So they were just like, holy moly, like
Yeah.
what are these people like? What are they doing? What are their practices? So there was also bilocation too. For example, there was this one lady who was sewing, and she actually had a hole. Before that happened, she actually said that somebody shot her, and she was actually a caiman. She was in two different places. She was in, a caiman, one like a type of alligator, crocodile.
Yeah.
Like she was in, and there was a gentleman who shot her. Who shot?
And
But
it manifested in that present moment.
yes, yes,
I've heard of stories like that. I've heard of stories
yeah,
like that where,
yeah.
like, you might be dreaming and then you wake up with a wound, or you might be just in deep meditation and I don't know, you go into a past life or you do something and you manifest those symptoms in the present moment. What?
So those are the ones that take a lot of what's known as the Hyodal energy, because there's different. I'll talk little bit about like what are the different soul animating energies for shapeshifting, right?
Yeah.
Because and that's a lot of scholars that have studied this like academically. Academically, that have like gone to the ethnohistorical records and like looked at the pictures and looked at the language and everything. Is the Hyodal, which was like concentrated in like the lower regions of the solar plexus, the first, the second, but the like that area, the abdomen area, that was the willpower, the power of will. And that
Yes.
was that was the energy that could enchant people.
Yes.
And during, for example, like when a ruler, the Magickal ruler would take place, like that was one of the things that it was saying that he would ask for Tezcatlipoca to give him an Ihyodal energy so he could talk. He could like speak to the people and like kind of like sing to them, like enchant them.
Ooh,
So
interesting.
so that was like one, and that was the really strong energy that you needed for that kind of shape shifting.
It's interesting that you say that because, when I taught a class on willpower and magic, right? And we talk about the solar plexus, we talk about that lower abdominal area. I always compare it to singing, and singing from the diaphragm, because that's where your power comes from. That's where that gospel singing, that big voice comes from. It's from that diaphragm, from that part down there. Oh my gosh, that's so cool to see that cross culturally in another culture having that same That's awesome.
Yeah. So there's that's physical, and there's also, as I mentioned, bilocation. But there's also things like etheric shapeshifting. And I use like Western terms because a lot of people are familiar more with like the auric, the subtle bodies. The etheric body is like just a little bit, like a little bit above like our physical body. And that is something where you can connect. What you do is you connect to an animal. And it's not necessarily you take over that animal's body, but you become an animal. You become that. And it's something that you feel like, and I usually recommend it for people like if they feel like a strong connection to a certain animal, to start journeying and start looking at that, and they engage in certain things. And I do state different exercises in terms of like how to raise the animating energies, but I'll get to that in a second. So the etheric is like, one way is like meditating and connecting with them, having pictures, different ways. So there's etheric shapeshifting, right?
Yeah.
And then there's astral shapeshifting. Sometimes astral shapeshifting does cross over into the physical world. One of my mentors shared with me that there was one time as a jaguar in the astral world, he actually got what's known as a sastun, which is a divination. Divination is where he could actually see into things. And he got that from the astral realms. And there's
And
also,
he was able to take that into the physical and had that forever after that. Wow.
Yeah. And there's also something known as joining. And this is something that I recommend that you always ask the animal, and it's usually an animal that is your animal coessence. Because I talk about animal guides and animal coessences, which are believed to have a same tonali or chuya, like a soul energy. And I'll talk about the different ones that we share that with them, an energy signature with them. Because it's not, we don't want to take over. Because if we go into an animal's body, they're going to be like, excuse me. They might like push us out or like freak out, what's going on? So there's joining, and I talk about those different ones too. And you can see too in a lot of the images too that there were so many different understandings of shapeshifting and so many ways and expressions of that, and connecting and what we would like identify as remote viewing, they would like, do it in the astral realms, using so the three animating energies that they use, there was, as I mentioned, the hyodal, which is like, associated with like the abdomen, the liver, that. And then there was the tonali, which I talk a lot about in my second book, Curanderismo, Soul Retrieval, which is, because those three animating energies, out of those three, the tonali was the only one that we could lose. If we lost the other two, the tiola and the hyodal, we would die, right?
Wow.
So the tonali was something like if we have traumas, it leaves us. Tonali is in our blood. Tonali is in our hair. A lot of people that have had traumas, like even like chemo, like that oscillate, like just traumas, like the weak hair, it's in our hair. It's actually in our head. So it's in our blood. So there's that. There's the tonali, and there's also the teyoya, which was the heart, the sacred heart. And mountains and places could also have a sacred heart too.
That is so mythological, and like about the hero's journey, and some, a hero going in search of the heart of the mountain. Like I can see all of that happening. That's amazing. That's crazy.
So somebody who is really skilled at shapeshifting, they would definitely work on building their soul animating energies. And consequently, some of the pictures of the Maya, which this did happen, in order to raise some of those energies, some of them, they took other people's energies, soul animating energies. So there was that too.
That's where the little darker elements come in. That's where the not so nice Curanderismos come in, right? So this is it's not just about trying to communicate with these spirit guides. You first have to build up the energy to do that. You first have to exercise those quote unquote energetic muscles within you before you go out there. Because I mean, I can sort of see, a 13-year-old kid being like, okay, I'm gonna go talk to an alligator and like try and figure this out. And I definitely definitely discourage that. There's that process before. And so again, getting this book and reading it thoroughly on those process, and honestly your soul retrieval one too, because like you mentioned, you talk about the different spirits in there as well, will definitely give you at least a preliminary working ground to get you started, you know? So what does that communication look like with your
So,
spirit guides,
so
animal guides?
I do want to distinguish, right? So there's communication and there's shapeshifting, which I talk about it in different contexts, right? And there's also journeying with them, and there's different ways we can journey with them, right? That we don't necessarily become them, that they become more of like our helpers, our guides, our seers. So there's three. There's three, right? Like communicating with an animal that we may see in our dreams, in the physical realms, in the spiritual realms, and then there's also actually shape-shifting. And the reason why we would shape-shift, there's many reasons, but like for example, a lot of the times we get like this sense of inhibition, like and it can be a very good way, like a very freedom. We get like just happy and silly, and we like are happy rolling around, like there's different things
Playful.
that we would, yeah, there's different reasons why we would want to shapeshift, so we could go and expand and experience what it is like to fly, what it is like to see the world from an animal. Then there's communication, where we start basically developing a symbolic communication with them, a language.
Yes.
Whether it's like, for example, like one of, like, gosh, like I want to say like 20 years ago. Has it been that long? Yeah, it has. One of my friends, because I said, I felt this really strong connection with crows. And she recommended, she's like, you should start with putting crows on your altar. And I started with that, and then all of a sudden I just started seeing crows, like, and then we started developing this communication. We started developing that and connecting, and then I started singing. There was one time I was studying for an exam, studying for my master's exams, and I was like literally going like kind of a little bit stir crazy from so much studying. Just it was intense studying and writing. So I was running around the house, and I started singing a song about crows. I don't know. Just like singing around, just singing, just like releasing. And then the next morning I go hiking, and at the very entrance of my hike, there's this beautiful crow feather.
See?
So there's those kind of things. There's communication, and I talk about like all the breath, the beautiful breath of connecting with animals.
Yes.
And appreciating them.
You speak about breath. You speak about, acupressure. You speak about mudras. You speak about chakras. Now, originally, when you're going through these, because it's kind of pretty cohesive through some of your books. Originally you think, oh my gosh, that's normally you see those concepts over in India. So does that do Curandismo have their own types of chakra systems and acupressure systems and mudra systems as well, or versions of it?
Oh yeah. And I do talk about both of it in both animal medicine and Curanderismo, soul retrieval. But it's something to like, if you ever go to like famsi.org, famsi.org, and you look at the Maya vases, you'll see that in a lot of the pictures, they're doing what's called mudras, hand postures. Because these mudras, hand postures, they actually create electromagnetic charges in the body.
Right.
And breath work was very big. You see like beautiful air volutes coming out when they're speaking, when they're doing these mudras, engaging in ceremonies. And they definitely knew about, like, they actually connected the different areas of the body with the non-ordinary realm, to connect it on a quantum realm, to go in, to shapeshift, to do journeying work in these spaces by accessing and concentrating on these energy bodies. So, and these parts of the body, right? Both, outside and internally. Like for example, the abdomen region, the Hyodo was very much connected to the underworld, while we were living. And then, while we were living, the Teoya, the heart, was very much connected to the middle world. So it was like the tonali was like, the upper world. So it was like connecting it, and they had some different variations within central Mexico, but they had understandings of beautiful understandings of energy and how it
Yes.
reflected in our body and how we were like mirroring the cosmos, so to speak,
Yeah.
and vice versa.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing when you research all of these ancient cultures, and you want so hard to put everything into boxes and to say, okay, this goes with this group and this goes with that group. But at a energetic level, they all understood certain body movements, such as mudras, dances, martial arts. Certain movements can affect you on a quantum level, on an energetic level. They understood the energy points and the meridians that were in the body, whether that was in India or in Africa or in Mesoamerica. They understood that energy flows in directions and you can affect that flow. And I think it's just amazing that when you kind of just strip away all of the stuff, which we don't want to do. We definitely want to make sure that the cultural aspects of each of these systems are well preserved and definitely shared. But when you strip that all away and you look at it just in form of energy, it's really amazing how universal a lot of these concepts are.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how you explain a lot of these concepts in these books as well, for sure. So you mentioned here when you were explaining the mudras and the certain energy points about the lower world, underworld, middle world. Like, what are these worlds about? What is that?
So I talk about this in chapter 2. There's no chapter 1 of my book, and basically there's different medicines, and it's I'm going to give like a response, but there's something like vast, So I'll start out with the upper world. So the upper world are ancestors, our esteemed ancestors, supernatural beings, deities, animals were associated with the upper world. Our soul pieces, our tonali, for example, and I'll use the Nahuatl word. When we had traumas, there would be pieces that would go into the upper world. And that's usually like with people who, when we have traumas, like for example, like a fallen hero or a fallen heroine, like a disappointed, like with mom or dad, or like a family, like we have a trauma, there's a part of our soul piece that goes to the upper world to get medicine there.
Mm.
To get medicine there. And there's also a connection there too, like the upper world, there's medicine there when you want to connect to playfulness, when you want to connect to wisdom, when you want to connect to ancestral guidance. So there's medicine in these different realms, in these different worlds. And when we can connect with an animal, either as a guide or becoming that animal to fly into these worlds, or to go into a monkey, become a monkey and like go and like hang from trees and like spin into them and go into them, we get medicine from them. We start getting teaching from them and wisdom from them, because these realms also have their own energies as well, and gifts and teachings. So that's the upper world is just generally, like what it is there. And then the middle world, it's very interesting. It's like you can like go and look at it like different lives. A lot of work that's done in like past life regression kind of thing, it's done in the middle world realm, because that's when you can go into like different times, points, and spaces in this lifetime and other lifetimes to assess what happened, to assess what part of us needs to be honored. And a lot of animals like that were, and I did just to go back a little bit too, like for example, like in the upper world, animals that could fly, animals that were diurnal, that could be in the day, hummingbirds, for example, were associated with the upper world that could like shimmer like the soul energy of the sun. So there were animals that were also understood as connected to the upper world. And then of course there were animals too that were mythological, that were connected to various different worlds, but they would connect to these animals, connect with them as guides, and become them to go into these different worlds to get medicine, to get understandings, right? So those are some of the animals for the upper world. And then the middle world, as I was mentioning, as it being a different time and space, that was associated, in the middle world is very much associated with like abundance, harvest, fertility, growth, cycles, change, seasons, right? So the animals, like for example, the rabbit, who's just like and rabbits were associated with the underworld too, and the upper world, but were like, they could just make so many babies. So you would connect with a rabbit, for example, or also to like a caiman, like, you know, a crocodile. You would like, that would be associated like with the world, like the earth, you know, because it was like thought of like the top, the surface of the crocodile or the caiman was associated with the earth. So there were animals that you would go in there to basically, if you were having issues with abundance, with change, with able to be able to like go and you wanted to like grow and prosper, and you were having blocks to that, a shaman may have you connect to an animal from the middle world so you can understand where are these blocks coming from.
Interesting.
How do you get more abundance, and would connect you to an animal that is like just abundant, like with fertility and growth, you know, just something along those lines to help you to actually, and like would help you maybe even to like etherically shapeshift into them so you can start understanding what it is to just have abundance with grace. You know, so so there's that. I mean, there's so many beautiful things that I can talk about, the middle world and the upper world. So the underworld. Oh, and you know, so the middle world too, like if you have a soul piece, you know, when you're doing like soul retrieval work, like maybe there's something that like there's some reason we're stuck in a certain part of our lives that we just, there's a part of us that doesn't like, for example, maybe there was a move that someone had and they didn't like where they're living now, and so part of them stayed at their old house, you know, or that old life. So you might get an animal to take you there, to guide you there, to help bring you back, you know, or bring you to that place to find you so you can talk to that soul piece and talk to them and find out, how can I love you? What do you need? So there's that too. And there's many ways of how to work with the animals in these realms, right? And then the underworld, it's a very beautiful medicine. It's transformative medicine. You know, it's where we do a lot of our shadow work.
Oh, that's such a popular topic these days. It sure is. Talk about it.
Yeah. It's where we do a lot of our shadow work. It's where, you know, it's believed, like, for example, the Popol Vuh, the Quiche Popol Vuh, Maya, the twins, the hero twins, they actually went in and they did battle with the lords of the underworld. And they had to go through different levels of the underworld and pass these different tests. Like, and I talk about some of them in my book. Like, for example, one of the things that they had to do was they had to smoke a cigar without actually smoking it, without burning it. So what they did was they got a firefly. One of the fireflies went in there and like pretended like it was like on. So it pretended like they were smoking it, like to trick the lords of the underworld.
No
so
way.
They had like helpers, like, you know, and fireflies also happen to be from the underworld, you know, like helpers that are there too. Like, so it's those, because the thing is, the hero twins were a little bit arrogant at the very beginning of the story, but you know, they had to like they had to prove themselves. And they had to prove themselves and go through all these tests and tribulations to show their faith. And one of the things that they had to do at the very end is the lords of the underworld ground them up into maize, into corn, threw them in the water, and then they actually were reborn.
Wow.
You know, so it's one of those things that was a space of the underworld where you really had to step up.
Yeah.
You
know, so these animals that are associated with each realm, is it okay to say that you would need, as a curandera, as a shapeshifter, as this shaman, do you need a helper from each realm, or would you just have one animal helper that just so happens to be able to travel through all of them to help you? Like, do you have access to all the animals, or are you only assigned to one or two in your lifetime?
So there's a little, like, let me just tease that out a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So I always recommend personally to get to know an animal. But sometimes some animals will just come up, like, they'll start courting us.
Yeah.
You know, they'll start courting us, singing to us, leaving us gifts, like crossing our paths, coming into our dream, just like, hey, can I work with you? You're fun.
It's true.
They have messages for us, right? So, and then there's also different things too, like animals have messages. They're omens too. So there's that as well, right? But in terms of like working with an animal to go into these different non-ordinary realms, sometimes when I work with people, for example, their animal will come through. There was like one time, and I talk about this too in my second book, Curanderismo Story Retrieval, that I was working with somebody who, she had a very difficult, like, just difficult situation where her dad would actually like lock her in the closet, and one of the things that we did, and this is before like I knew that happened, that her dad did that, was a bear came in, and I like bears, but bear's not something I usually work with. I love bears, but it's just, okay, bear's here. Hey, what's up? A bear came in and actually like literally busted the door open and took her, like, and ran off with her because there was a soul theft.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, and like there was a part of her too that like that needed to happen. Her animal spirit guide came forward. And people work differently. Like I'm okay with it. Like I'm open to it. Like if someone's animal guide wants to come forward or guide, I'm open to it. I do have certain animals that I love to work with. Especially when I'm in different like realms. I love to work with the bat. I love to work with, and it depends on what terrain I'm in that I'm used to working with.
Okay. And that came with time and building those relationships with those animals. So in essence, you can have more than one. You're not just assigned to one, or one is not just assigned to you.
As an animal guide, yes. As an animal coessence, where we share a soul energy with them, because it's believed that on the time that we are born, we are assigned to a certain type of soul energy.
Interesting.
And because every day has a certain, like, it's like a astrology, right? That there's different times we're born, different dates. There's certain energies that come with that, right? They also had understanding that, indigenous people also had that understanding too. So on certain days and certain times, animals are also born, and we can share soul energy with them, right? And how that happens when you have that soul energy, that animal will do anything for you, especially when you connect with them. They will do anything for you. They like have your back. That like it's just this beautiful connection. So there's that, and it's believed that we can have one, some say two, some say three animal coessences. The third one is usually a domestic animal, they say.
So you had brought up this idea of, what communication and omens. So, I'm always a big proponent of sometimes an apple is just an apple, right? And, you go outside during bird molting season and you see a cardinal feather on the floor. Don't get too hyped about that because it's bird molting season, right? So the likelihood that that's an omen, probably not. But how does someone tell if something is an omen or a direct communication from their animal spirit, versus just any other day or any other normal animal behavior?
Well, see, the thing is that it's not necessarily we're looking at it like whether something is an omen or not. It's basically learning how to it's my mentors, how they taught me was like learning how to communicate. That they always have a message for us, but it's not necessarily like you can go and research it on the internet, like, oh, what's the meaning of that animal?
Right.
Sometimes the message is just slow down. Slow down. Look around. Be present.
Right.
So there's, in terms of that, it's like everything usually is just, it's not like an omen, like it's something that we have to like, but there's always that, we always have a connection with them. I would say that.
Okay.
Maybe, I would say that like that would expand that, like in terms of like expand that a little bit in terms of like, what does that mean? So like, for example, like, and I talk about this in my book too. There was a lady, this beautiful Armenian lady that I worked with, who was so fearful of owls. And she came to me, and she had just had she came for me for soba Curanderisimo treatments, which are like a shamanic energy massage kind of thing, right? She came for that, and she came for soul retrieval. And she had just had a horrible accident. Her, she had back injury, she was depressed. It was bad, right?
Wow.
And she kept having dreams of owls, and she was terrified. She was like, I'm having dreams of owls when, in my culture, that means death. Someone's going to die. Am I going to die? I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean, but that's
the first place people go, but it's okay.
Yeah, I love owls. I kind of a little bit, but I was like, no, honey, you're not going to die. So I started explaining to her, owls are associated with the underworld. Yes, there's a death going. It's an ego death.
Right.
There's something that is dying. The way that brought you into that, because before her accident, she was in rinse and repeat mode. She didn't have time for herself. She just worked. It's rinse, repeat, go to work, come home, eat, work, go to home. Didn't really just wasn't
enjoying
present.
life. Yeah, it wasn't present.
No. So one of the things is the owl was coming forward. It's that needs to change. That needs to die.
Mm-hmm. And then the accident was probably the shakeup, the physical shakeup. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was really funny. It was not, I don't know, interesting, I should say. So she actually started developing a connection with the owl. She had an altar. She also came to me as a referral. There was a lady because she came from somebody who has worked with me a long time and swore I changed all these things. So she actually listened. So she actually did create an altar.
That's good. That's awesome.
And then she called me one time, and she was freaking out. She's like, oh my God, the insurance company, because she was trying to get money for the accident, right? It was a lawsuit. And the insurance company wants to take my deposition. They have a lawyer, and she was panicking.
Oh God.
And then so I called her down, and one of the things that was very interesting to me is that later on, she actually in that evening, she actually did see an owl. And then when she was driving, fast forwarding to the deposition, driving in LA, which was probably, I'm like, are you sure? But okay. She swears to me that she was driving in the day. She saw a beautiful white owl fly over her, and she knew everything was going to be fine. The case settled in her favor. It was settled that day. It was done. But there was this understanding of her life and being present.
Yes. Yes.
So I would say it's that. It's allowing ourselves to just what was that? Maybe it's just to be present.
Right. But I love that little piece of the story, because that's what I always talk about. Because you question for a minute there that she saw an owl during the day. You're like, owls don't come out during the day. So that, to me, that is an omen. That is a sign, because it's so just outside of their normal behavior, outside of something you would normally see of that particular animal. And it's a shocker, because I think all of us we're on autopilot all the time. The average person is just, like you said, wake up, go to work, eat, sleep, wake up, go to work, eat, sleep. And, sometimes our guides have to shock us into something, and that might manifest in a physical accident or something really traumatizing in that sense, or it might manifest as an animal doing something completely outside of their normal behavior, just so that you can see for yourself. But if I saw that owl in the middle of the night, I don't know, to me, I wouldn't take that as a sign. I'd be like, oh, there's an owl. You know what I mean? But I guess that has to do with circumstance. I guess, like you said, she was going through stuff. She needed to be present and see that through that lens in order to get that message. And I think that's what's so tough for people, is to learn how to see something through that lens of spirit, because everyone is seeing just through the mundane and just through the muck.
And also to be willing to develop the understanding of what does that mean for me, rather than going to the internet. And that's what I encourage people to in my book, and the communication. It's look, I'm going to provide you the second part of it, the a dictionary kind of thing of the meanings of the animals, and
so
what
cool.
It could mean, what the different the message is, it could be bringing you the medicine it has, but ultimately try to start, like, before you read that, assess what that means for you.
Yes. Love it. Oh my
Assess.
God. Oh my God, it's 7:55. I didn't even realize how fast this went. And I still have like a million questions. So, okay. Erika, what are you working on? What are some new things that you might be doing? Any workshops, any stuff that's upcoming that people might want to, participate in, or, find ways of contacting you? How can they reach you? What's going on?
Okay, so there's a lot of things going on, but I do want to mention one thing really important. For the 1st of August, this is free. It's going to be online and also in person for the book signing, to like start working to like, I'm going to show people how to do journey work in the non-ordinary realms and connecting to our animal spirit guides. And it's just a free event. It's like the experiential experience, so to speak. Like experiencing it yourself, what the book is about, and being able to journey. So that's at realizeyourbliss.com. So, and it's the 1st of August. So if they go to that, if like anyone goes to like events, the events tab, and they go to the 1st of August, or if they go to the books column, they'll look at that. And then like I have a bunch of other events, but that's something that I feel is really important. Like, so if people like don't have experience with doing journeying work with animals, like a good like first attempt in how to do this, and how to start connecting, and how to start working in these realms, and how to start getting medicine and messages.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. And it's free, you guys. And it's free. Everyone lines up for free. It's true. And how can they reach you? What are some ways that they can get a hold of you if they have any questions or want to get services from you?
So it's the same thing, realizeyourbliss.com. I have the services there, and I have contact, and
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Erika, thank you so much. Once again, let's show your books and make sure that everyone sees them, takes note of them. Pause the video if you need to. Write them all down and make sure you get them. They are amazing. I haven't gotten the Sacred Energies of the Sun and Moon yet, so I'm definitely going to be picking that up after this live for sure. So thank you so much, Erika, for hanging out with us today and for allowing us to sort of be your apprentice, if you will, for 1 hour. It was amazing, and I do hope that we get to do this again sometime. Maybe when your next book comes out.
Absolutely. But thank you so much for having me, honey. Thank you so much. It's a lot of fun.
I wish I could take questions, you guys. I did see a few, but you know what? Keep those questions coming, and I'll make sure that I go through them. And any questions, I'll forward over to Erika, and hopefully you'll be able to answer at a later date. Okay. All right, everyone. Have a beautiful Thursday night. Enjoy everything. Make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe, and thanks again for joining my show, The Magical Solution. This is how we grow. Have a good night, everyone.